From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Hurricane Michael is the worst storm that the Florida Panhandle has ever seen, and one of the worst power storms to ever make landfall in the United States.
At least 2 people have died as Hurricane Michael batters the Florida Panhandle and Georgia. The storm was supercharged by warmer-than-usual water in the Gulf of Mexico. We'll go to the Florida Panhandle for the latest. Then we look at Malik Shahid Hussein, the owner of the limousine company, at the center of Saturday's crash that killed 20 people in New York, one of the worst transportation disasters in a decade in the U.S. Hussein is a former FBI informant who repeatedly entrapped Muslim men, landing many of them in jail. We'll speak with a number of people who knew Hussein, including a Pittsburgh man who was entrapped by him and just got out of jail.
Anything that he touches, anything that he's involved in, comes to ruin. This guy is a criminal. He's a liar. He's a thief. He's a con artist.
Plus, we'll speak with Yale professor Jason Stanley on his new book, How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. At least 2 people have died in the U.S. after Hurricane Michael slammed into Florida and Georgia Wednesday as a Category 4 storm nearing Category 5. With winds topping 155 miles per hour, Michael is the 3rd most powerful storm to ever hit the U.S. mainland. The Carolinas are now bracing for more flooding just weeks after the region was devastated by Hurricane Florence. While meteorologists say Hurricane Michael was supercharged from the warmer-than-usual water in the Gulf of Mexico, there was almost no mention of global warming on the cable news networks. Advocacy groups say the Florida Department of Corrections has not evacuated at least a dozen prisons and mandatory evacuation zones as of Wednesday. This comes as, in Spain, torrential rains and flash flooding have killed at least 10 people on the island of Majorca. 9 inches of rain fell in just 2 hours in what meteorologists are calling a 1 in 1,000 years weather event. Meanwhile, in Indonesia, a 6.0 magnitude earthquake shook the islands of East Java and Bali early this morning, killing at least 3 people. This comes as the official death toll from the devastating 7.5 magnitude earthquake and tsunami in Indonesia 2 weeks ago has risen to over 2,000 dead, with over 5,000 people still missing. A new United Nations report says the damages caused by extreme weather events and other so-called natural disasters have cost $2.9 trillion in economic losses over the last 20 years. This is Professor Debarathi Guha, who is a contributor to the report.
We really need to have some disaster risk reduction and disaster risk mitigation, that is adaptation for the short term. For 5 to 10 year period, poor people in poor countries do not have 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. Most of those children will be dead. This is what is going to happen. Either they will be dead because of the catastrophe itself, or they'll be dead because of the prevailing persistent effect of malnutrition that comes along with these catastrophes.
This follows Monday's report by the Nobel Peace Prize-winning United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which found humanity has only a dozen years to mitigate global warming and limit the scope of global catastrophe. We'll have more on climate change and Hurricane Michael after headlines. The Washington Post is reporting, based on U.S. intelligence intercepts, that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, ordered an operation to lure Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, in Arabic Jamal Khashoggi, back to Saudi Arabia from his home in Virginia. Khashoggi disappeared last week after entering the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. One Turkish official told the New York Times Khashoggi was assassinated inside the consulate by a team of 15 Saudi operatives who used a bone saw to dismember his body before smuggling body parts out of the building. The U.S. intelligence intercepts are the latest piece of evidence implicating the Saudi government directly in Khashoggi's death, which has sparked a diplomatic crisis for the Trump administration, particularly for President Trump and his son-in-law, senior advisor Jared Kushner. Kushner has actively cultivated Mohammed bin Salman as a key ally, praising the young leader, dining with him in Washington and Riyadh, and hosting one-on-one phone calls with him outside of normal diplomatic channels. On Wednesday, President Trump also praised Mohammed bin Salman, calling him a fine man, as Trump answered reporters' questions about who within the Saudi government he'd spoken to about Khashoggi's disappearance.
I'd rather not say, but at a very high level, the highest level. Let me say this, it's the highest level. Okay? Yeah.
You mentioned that you talked to
more than once.
You had mentioned that you spoke to King Salman, so I mean.
Well, I do anyway, and I've always found him to be a fine man. We've had a very good relationship. I'm not happy about this. We have to see what happens. You know, we have to see what happens. Nobody knows what happened yet. They don't know over there, but it's a very serious situation. And it's something we're taking very seriously.
In Brazil, thousands of people took to the streets of Sao Paulo to protest against far right-wing presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro, who won first place in Sunday's presidential election, but will face a runoff against the second-place candidate, Fernando Haddad of the leftist Workers' Party, on October 28th. These are two of the protesters in Sao Paulo.
We have the fascist threat that is Bolsonaro, and we have to position ourselves.
I am very scared that there's a chance that Bolsonaro will become president. Our mission is to make no our answer, and I think we have 18 days to do it and try to solve this situation.
Wednesday's protests came as the Wall Street Journal endorsed Bolsonaro, despite his long history of making racist, homophobic and misogynistic comments, as well as openly praising Brazil's military dictatorship. Using language that mirrored President Trump's campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again," the Wall Street Journal's editorial board wrote, quote, "Bolsonaro is best understood as a conservative populist who promises to make Brazil great for the first time. He's attracted support from the middle class by pledging to reduce corruption, crack down on Brazil's rampant crime, and liberate entrepreneurs from government control." At least 8 people died and another 25 are missing after a boat carrying refugees capsized off the coast of Turkey. The United Nations says over 1,700 refugees have died trying to cross the Mediterranean so far this year. Meanwhile, Moroccan Navy officers opened fire on a boat carrying Moroccan refugees towards Europe, injuring a 16-year-old boy. Last month, the Moroccan Navy opened fire on another refugee boat, killing a 20-year-old Moroccan woman. In Burma, authorities have arrested 3 journalists after they wrote a piece criticizing the government. The journalist from 11 Media Group, who wrote about the funding of a city bus system, could face up to 2 years in prison if found guilty of, quote, "fear or alarm to the public," unquote. In 2016, editors from the same paper went to jail over a piece accusing a government official of bribery. The arrests come just a month after a Burmese court sentenced 2 Reuters journalists to 7 years in prison for violating Burma's colonial-era Official Secrets Act, causing international condemnation. At the time of their arrest, the Reuters journalists, Jo So-woo and Wa Lon, were investigating a massacre committed by the Burmese military targeting Rohingya Muslims. In Peru, Keiko Fujimori, the leader of the opposition and daughter of former dictator President Alberto Fujimori, was arrested Wednesday over allegations of money laundering and accepting illegal campaign contributions. Last week, a Peruvian judge overturned a pardon of her father, Alberto Fujimori, who's now expected to return to prison for crimes including kidnapping, bribery, and ordering massacres by death squads in the 1990s during his presidential rule. In financial news, the Dow Jones Industrial Average plunged by more than 800 points Wednesday as stocks of tech companies Facebook, Netflix, and Twitter all tumbled sharply. Economists say the market drop was sparked by the Fed's decision to raise interest rates after having propped up the economy for years following the 2008 economic crisis by holding interest rates at near zero levels. In more financial news, the Justice Department has approved a $69 billion merger between CVS Health and Aetna, one of the nation's largest healthcare insurance companies. The proposed merger is part of a wave of consolidation in the healthcare market, which experts say could leave patients with less control over their medical care and prescription drugs. In Canada, an Enbridge gas pipeline ruptured, sparking a massive fire, forcing about 100 members of the Ledley-Tenef First Nation to evacuate their homes in British Columbia. Enbridge is behind a series of controversial pipelines, including the Line 3 oil pipeline, which would carry tar sands oil from Alberta, Canada, to a terminal in Superior, Wisconsin, and whose proposed construction has sparked massive resistance from Indigenous communities on both sides of the U.S.-Canada border. At the U.S.-Mexico border, the family of Jose Antonio Rodriguez marched Wednesday to mark 6 years since the 16-year-old Mexican boy was fatally shot in the head by a U.S. Border Patrol agent who fired through the border fence and killed the teenager as he was walking on a sidewalk in Nogales, Mexico. This is his mother, Araceli Rodriguez.
Mi nombre es Araceli Rodriguez, mamá de José Antonio.
My name is Araceli Rodriguez, the mother of Jose Antonio. We're here because today marks 6 years since they assassinated my son. We're marching and we're demanding justice. That's why we're here, because we're demanding justice. Since 6 years after the assassination of my son, there is still no justice.
In Kazakhstan, 2 astronauts from the U.S. and Russia safely made an emergency landing this morning after the failure of a booster rocket as they were headed to the International Space Station. And activists turned the website BrettKavanaugh.com into a resource for survivors of sexual assault. The site, whose URL was secured by a judicial reform group back in 2015, now shows a picture of the Supreme Court overlaid with the words, "We believe survivors," followed by a list of organizations seeking to end rape and sexual violence. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. At least 2 people have died since Hurricane Michael made landfall in Florida and Georgia on Wednesday. It was the 3rd most powerful storm to ever hit the U.S. mainland. The storm landed near Mexico Beach, about 20 miles southeast of Panama City. It came ashore as a Category 4 storm with top sustained winds reaching 155 miles per hour. The powerful storm remained a hurricane as it moved further inland. Despite this, advocacy groups reported that the Florida Department of Corrections had not evacuated at least a dozen prisons in mandatory evacuation zones as of Wednesday. The Carolinas are now bracing for more flooding just weeks after the region was devastated by Hurricane Florence. Meteorologists said Hurricane Michael was supercharged from the warmer-than-usual water in the Gulf of Mexico. The storm destroyed homes, snapped trees, downed power lines, and flooded coastal towns. One resident of Panama City said the storm snapped trees like toothpicks.
I worked for the power company and retired, so I saw a lot of storm duty, but this one here was the worst I've seen. So it was good. You see what it did around here. It snapped trees like they were toothpicks. It was nothing to it.
Florida's Republican Governor Rick Scott spoke in Tallahassee on Wednesday.
Hurricane Michael is the worst storm that the Florida Panhandle has ever seen, and one of the worst power storms to ever make landfall in the United States.
Florida Governor Rick Scott has a long history of denying climate change. In 2011, his administration reportedly banned state employees in Florida's Department of Environmental Protection from using the terms climate change, global warming, and sea level rise. The massive hurricane comes just days after the United Nations issued a major report warning humanity has only a dozen years to mitigate climate change or face global catastrophe with severe droughts, floods, sea level rise, and extreme heat set to cause mass displacement and poverty. We go now to Pensacola, Florida, where we're joined by Gloria Horning, social and environmental justice advocate, serves on the Environmental Advisory Board for Pensacola. We welcome you to Democracy Now! Can you start off by describing the devastation in Florida?
Well, where I'm located, we really missed the bullet. Where the devastation takes place is about 80 miles east of here. But the issues that you just brought up is about climate change and the impact our coastal waters are seeing now with sea rise, warmer waters, waters coming in from our stormwater drains from the bay, and then the impact of sewer breaks that go all over our communities. Our last Hurricane Gordon, we had 300,000 gallons of raw sewage displaced on minority communities.
Why do you say, Gloria, why specifically on minority communities?
Well, they're the last ones to be, our infrastructure is very, very old. And what is being replaced in more affluent communities. And the community I live in, the Tan Yard, is the oldest African-American community in Pensacola. And we're constantly the sites of flooding. I sent you a couple of pictures of the water coming in our stormwater drains. Now, that's without any rain. The road in front of my house flooded just from what's coming up in the bay into our stormwater drains. And so when it does rain and those two mix, the sewer sanitation can't hold the capacity. So we're surrounded by about, I would say, 12 to 14 sewer heads, and they just blow.
And Gloria, what are the hardest hit areas?
Mexico Beach right now is destroyed, just as it was in Opal. Panama City, we're still getting information from that, but I do know that along the downtown area it was destroyed, and I've seen communities further up. This thing traveled all over. It's going into Atlanta as well.
Can you talk about the response of, well, you've got the mayor of Tallahassee, who is running for governor, Andrew Gillum. You have the governor, Rick Scott, who's running for Senate against Bill Nelson, the sitting senator. And can you talk about their political stances on the issue of climate change, how you think that bears on Hurricane Michael, and how they are dealing with this storm?
Oh, that's a great question. In Escambia County, we're one of the most polluted counties in the state, between coal, paper mills, unregulated illicit runoffs. And just to include, we've got 11 landfills in one community, and none of them are lined. So all that landfill juice is going down into our drinking water. Andrew Gillum is all about climate change. He doesn't believe it's a hoax. He is working very hard with groups like I'm working with, the Flood Forum, which help people harmed by climate change and environmental abuse. And Andrew Gillum, I couldn't be happier. Ironically, when I taught at Florida A&M, I taught him. So that tells you how old I am. But one thing that Andrew Gillum says especially is if we can reduce the rates of heart disease, asthma, respiratory, and even cancer, especially for children and seniors, he says we have the obligation to do something. And that's how climate change and environmental injustice is impacting minority communities, children, and our elderly, especially here in Escambia County.
Well, Gloria, before we conclude, if you could just tell us, what would you like Governor Rick Scott to do now?
Move to another state? Sorry. Scott's a day late. He's way late on this. He can't do anything. He needs to move on. He made this issue. He made this problem by denying climate change and then allowing chemical companies and the such pollute our waterways. You look at Lake Okeechobee and what it allowing the sugar industry to dump all those pesticides into Lake Okeechobee, then go into our Gulf and Atlantic. And now all of that poison is now up into the Panhandle. And I really predict we're going to have some sick folks out there, not just from the damage of the hurricane, but from the chemicals that they're now going to be exposed to.
Gloria Horning, I want to thank you for being with us. Social environmental justice advocate, serves on the Environmental Advisory Board for Pensacola, Florida. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, the astounding story of the owner of the limousine service in upstate New York, a limousine involved in one of the deadliest car crashes in many years in the United States. He was an FBI informant. Stay with us.
The only impossible thing is to delimit the impossible. The crown of necessity, the triumph of human spirit. Everything remains to be done. Shake and therefore demand more than the conclusion of reason. The only impossible thing is to delimit the impossible. The realm of necessity is a triumph of human spirit. Triumph of the
Au Grand Jour by the Stereolab. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We turn now to look at how a limousine crash that killed 20 people Saturday in upstate New York is linked to a man who is an FBI informant long accused of lying to the government and getting away with it. The crash in the town of Schoharie was the deadliest U.S. transportation disaster since 2009. The limousine had failed an inspection last month and was not licensed to be on the road. The New York Times reports that shortly before the crash, one of the victims sent a text message to a friend saying she was worried about the limo's condition. It has since been revealed the company that owned the car had a record of repeated safety violations. Earlier this year, it was issued written violations after vehicle inspections by the New York State Police and the Department of Transportation. On Wednesday, state officials arrested the operator of Prestige Limousine Chauffeur Service and charged him with criminally negligent homicide. He is Noman Hussain, the son of a Pakistani immigrant named Malik Shahid Hussain, who is the company's owner and also an FBI informant.
In 2001, Malik Shahid Hussain was arrested for helping people cheat on driver's license tests. In exchange for avoiding deportation, he took a job as an FBI confidential informant, posing as a radical arms dealer in FBI sting operations. Hussain was a key figure in the FBI's case against the so-called Newburgh Four, four black Muslim men sentenced to 25-year prison terms after they were convicted for placing what they thought were bombs in a New York synagogue in 2010. Defense attorneys say the men were entrapped by Hussain. We turn now to a Pittsburgh man who was entrapped by Hussain. His name is Khalifa al-Akili. He just finished serving nearly 8 years in federal prison and was released September 25th. In a moment, we're going to speak to him directly. He's in a halfway house. But first, we want to turn to a clip from the documentary Terror. That's T in parentheses and the word error, terror, where Khalifa al-Akili describes how Hussain, then working as an FBI informant in Pittsburgh under the name of Muhammad, tried to recruit him for a terror plot.
It was so clear that I didn't want to meet these guys. Like, seriously, like, I literally made up excuse after excuse after excuse. The next morning, walked up here to the corner, and that's when, quote-unquote, Muhammad came from around the corner. Just appeared out of nowhere. He had his hotel downtown Pittsburgh, and yet he was here in Wilkinsburg at 9:30 in the morning without no car, no vehicle. He just so happened to have that card from my mother on him. I reluctantly agreed to go to McDonald's and have some coffee with him. The morning that we all came in here, we actually sat at this first booth right here, and that's whenever he began to talk about his people being involved in jihad and whatnot and fighting.
Khalifa al-Akili joins us now on the telephone from Pittsburgh. Khalifa, welcome to Democracy Now! Congratulations on getting out of prison after almost 8 years. When you heard about this news of the worst U.S. traffic accident in almost a decade, and that the limousine that was used, that was illegally on the road, was owned by the FBI informant who led to your imprisonment. Can you talk about your response and exactly who Shahid Hussain is?
Yeah, good morning, Amy. I was completely devastated by this news. The fact that this man is allowed to continue to live among, citizens and to be out here when this guy he's a rodent. He's a liar. He's a thief. He's a criminal. He's a scam artist, and he's a danger to society. And the fact that this took place, and more than likely that the money that was used to build this company was money that was paid to him by our government. I mean, this is ridiculous because he's an asset to our government and he's bringing them manufactured cases of terrorism. This is why he's allowed to continue to stay in this country and to flourish and to run these illegal businesses in which he's constantly cutting corners. And it's just sad. 20 people die as a result of this guy's negligence. I mean, this is sick.
Khalifa, talk about how you met Hussain.
Yeah, I met him through the other informant that was involved in the case, Sharif. He told me one day, he said, hey, man, my brother's coming in from out of town, and I really want you to meet him. He's a real resourceful guy, and I think you guys will get along, be able to relate. And so that's how the initial introduction was made. I only met this guy once or twice on 2 different occasions. And, I didn't want to meet him from the very beginning because I already knew that he was an informant. I knew that he was trying to entrap me. But he was very aggressive in trying to pursue me and to sit down with me, to talk with me. And it's just sad, man, to hear this news. It really is.
Can you talk about where you're speaking to us from and how his actions led to your imprisonment?
Yeah, sure. I'm speaking from Pittsburgh. I'm in a halfway house. Right now I'm just focused on trying to, my transition back into society, to reunite with my family. And this guy's actions led to my imprisonment because of his attempts to entrap me. And then after I publicly exposed him, then the government came in with a 2-year-old picture of me and some friends having fun at a gun range and used that to indict me and give me a rack of years in federal prison. And yet this guy is responsible for directly or indirectly for the homicide of 20 people, and he's not going to do a day in jail.
How did you figure out he was an FBI informant?
Yeah, I knew because I knew that Sharif was an FBI informant. So the fact that this guy was introducing me to another guy, I knew immediately.
Mm-hmm. Well, Khalifa, I don't want you to get in trouble. You're at a halfway house, and I know you have to get off the air at 1:30. So I want to thank you very much for joining us. Khalifa Al-Akili joining us, talking about how he was entrapped by Malik Shahed Hussein, who is the man who owns the Prestige limousine service, the limousine that was illegally on the road. A number of his cars had failed inspection. And yet this limousine carried 20 people, the driver and 17 friends between the age of, I think, 24 and 34, who are all going to a 30th birthday party. 2 of the couples in the car had just gotten married. The driver, of course, killed, and 2 bystanders. We're joined now by 2 other guests who can talk about the man who owns this service. Not exactly clear where he is right now. His son has been arrested on manslaughter charges as a result of the accident. Here in New York, Sam Braverman joins us, an attorney who represented one of the Newburgh Four, who were convicted after Shahed Hussein led the group and organized the scheme. He'll tell us about that. And in Los Angeles, Lyric Cabral is with us, co-director of the film Terror. That's T in parentheses and the word error, terror, a documentary that follows undercover FBI informant Saeed Sharif Torres, who Khalifa was just talking about, another FBI informant. Lyric, we met you at the Sundance Film Festival, this astounding film a few years ago. If you can finish Khalifa's story for us, how he figured out who Shahed was and the significance. I mean, he not only was involved in the jailing of men in Pittsburgh, but also, as we'll talk about with Sam Braverman, the men in New York who were then entrapped and are serving decades in prison at this point. Lyric.
Yes. So Shahed Hussein, in Pittsburgh, he was going by the name Muhammad, and he had been assigned there, presumably to investigate Khalifa Al-Akili. But because of the Newburgh 4 case, because that was such a publicly critiqued example of entrapment, during that trial, Shahed Hussein was photographed and was exposed. His photograph was placed on, actually it was the front cover of the New York Times. And so because of all the publicly available information, in part due to Sam Braverman and other defense attorneys on the Newburgh 4 team, there was basically this publicly available information about Shahed Hussein, including recordings that he made of the Newburgh 4 that were entered as government evidence during their trial in 2009. So all of this was sort of public. And so when Khalifa had his suspicions about Hussein, Shahed Hussein in Pittsburgh under the name Muhammad gave Khalifa a business card with a number. And Khalifa, due to his suspicions, he Googled that phone number, and it referenced a number in one of the Newburgh 4 trial transcripts that was publicly available. So Khalifa, through this Google search, was able to actually confirm on paper that Shahid Hussein was an informant.
I mean, that is simply amazing. This guy gives him his number. He's very nervous about him, and he checks it out on Google, and he sees it's the number of the FBI informant in the Newburgh 4 case, which brings us to Sam Braverman.
Good morning.
Hi, it's great to have you with us. Talk about this case in Newburgh. Yes, it was front-page news, but I think for many people in this country, it's long been forgotten about as they rot away in jail.
Oh, absolutely true. So the trial is essentially Maqsood. That was his nickname in our case. Of course, I don't think anybody could honestly say they know what his real name is because he did so much immigration fraud on his original asylum application. So I don't think anybody believes that. He could be Fred. I mean, nobody knows his real name. But beyond that, he comes to Newburgh. He's tasked to go into Newburgh. He goes into mosques, and he's specifically tasked.
Newburgh, a very depressed town.
Newburgh is a very depressed town. He was in Wappingers Falls before originally, and he went into a mosque, and the people said, "Get out of here. Get out of here." He went to the Newburgh Mosque, and the imam there said, "Get out of here."
Why? Why were they telling him to leave?
They were telling him to leave because he was in there to say, let's have a jihad, let's have a holy war. And the people in the mosque were saying, well, this has nothing to do with us. We are here to pray. We're here for a peaceful mission. And so he kept getting thrown out of places. And he found a disaffected person in a parking lot. And that's how the Newburgh case began. And his name was James Cromedy. So James Cromedy was a loudmouth by his own absolute admission. He shot off his mouth endlessly. And then, like Khalifa, one day he said, I don't have any interest in this man anymore, and hid for a month and a half. Hid. The FBI knew exactly where he was because they were trailing him everywhere. But every time that Maqsood would knock on his door, he was hiding behind the door. Or he'd call him. He'd say, I'm out of town. I'm in Philly, wherever I am. But the FBI was paying Maqsood to do something. He had a job, like a salesman. So as a salesman, he only gets paid if he makes the sale. And he has to tell the person who wants to make the sale, let me tell you anything you want to hear. So in our trial, Shahid Hussein said things like, I'll give you $250,000, a barbershop, free cars, free travel. My client, Laguerre Payen, was totally impoverished, and my client was bought for food. So in every meeting, my client is eating. That's how you got my client to join this thing. There's a... if you feed somebody rice and they're starving, they'll believe anything you ask them to believe because they're starving to death, as was my client. So that was the premise that got everybody into this. Once they were there, Shahid Hussein just kept doing things. His everyday task was to make the story better. And the FBI was continually trying to reel him in at the same time. So they're saying, no, don't offer those things. You can offer $5,000. So he went off the reservation and said, no, $250 is good. And then he did these things. And then he lied to his handlers about it. And they didn't know about it until they actually heard the tapes where he said, $250. I offered you $250. You didn't want it. How about a car? So it was endless. And he said, I'm going to fly you on a plane. My client said, I can't go anywhere. I don't have a passport. You're talking about the most uneducated, the most unsalvageable young men. They target him.
This is very significant because Shahid knows enough that he cannot just be offering financial inducements. He has to, as he talks about, the cause. They have to be there for the cause, right. Jihad, not for the money, because that'll get the FBI in trouble. So I want to go to the HBO documentary, The Newburgh Sting, which features secret recordings the FBI made of conversations between the undercover FBI informant Shahid Hussein and James Cromedy, one of the men who became part of the Newburgh 4. You have to listen very closely because, well, obviously this is surveillance audio. It's hard to understand. The clip begins with Shahid Hussein.
What is your understanding that you make a lot of money and still be on the side of Allah?
That'll be good, but I have to know what I'm going to do to make the money.
I have a lot of ideas, okay, for you.
You can get some people, it'll be nice. If you get bodies, it'll be nice. Okay.
Do you have to use that word, body?
But you said that you were going to get some brothers together.
Don't worry about the brothers. Don't worry. You're going to meet some brothers. Just be easy.
Inshallah, I'm hoping we can do it.
So that is Shahid Hussein saying you're going to get some brothers together to James Cromedy. And this is another clip from the secret FBI recordings. This one begins with James Cromedy.
None of these brothers got jobs, huh? Only there's 3 of us without no jobs.
True.
But actually, How you think we feel? We getting ready to do all this, we ain't got no money in our pockets, How you think we feel? Look at me, bro. How you think they feel?
If these brothers are doing for money, I don't need them. Subhanallah.
No, I talked to them already. They already know.
Okay. And
they're not even worried about it.
It is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's all it is. And if they won't need for money or greediness, or they think they're going to make any money or angerness, please do not, because this is jihad. This is jihad. And that's what jihad is.
But you know what they thinking, They can use the money, though.
So that was Cromedy at the end, who is now in prison, saying, I know you're saying jihad, but they really need the money. Right. So, and that's Shahed Hussein. And again, to bring this back for people who are just joining us now, Shahed Hussein, who runs the Prestige limousine service that was involved in this deadly car crash. He was cited numerous times for dangerous vehicles. This one was not supposed to be on the road in Skoghari, and it's the one that crashed, killing all 17 people in the car. And the driver, as well as 2 passersby.
Right.
So talk about then defending your clients and how they ended up in jail, because these are such damning, not so much of your clients, they're clearly desperate and sometimes trying to get away from him. He's coming up with the plot all the time. He shows them synagogues. He shows them a military base.
So in the case here, there were a lot of different ways. Remember, we are compressing time in a sense because it starts in early 2008 and it goes all the way to 2009, 9 months of recruitment. And during this 9 months of recruitment, people are leaving. They keep walking away. They can't find people. My client comes in. The first time he appears on tape anywhere, he says to Shahed, by the way, thanks for the job. I really needed a job. It doesn't say, I'm here to do damage to the world. I need a job. I mean, literally waifs on the street. So this persistence is what ultimately the FBI is allowed to use to say, let's compress it all into one moment. What do we have? We have people saying in clips, I'm here for the job. What the trial was about was pulling back that Band-Aid, that bandage that hides the actual wounds. And the wounds were Shahed Hussein doing whatever he wanted to do. And that's the connection with the case here today. It's not because he was an informant then and lied then that he's somehow legally responsible for this. It's because every day of his life and every minute he's ever had, he's had no responsibilities for anything. So he comes and he lies about his immigration and his application for asylum. Never punished. He comes here and he creates a fraudulent business. Never punished. He comes here and he does a bribery scandal at the DMV, and he's never punished. He comes here and he lies at the trial up in Albany. Never punished. He comes here and he files bankruptcy. Lies on his bankruptcy application. Never punished. Comes here at trial. And then for this whole case here, lies in every step of the trial, exceeds his authority, makes offers, binds the FBI to things, never punished. At trial, he lies on the stand. McMahon turns to the jury and says, this man is lying. Never held accountable for it. The government standard says you're doing a great job. In the Terra case, in other cases he's done, and now this. So the timeline is for all of us to watch this to say he's never been held accountable in his life for anything. So what does he learn from that? He learns sociopathy. The ability to say without remorse, without any concern, without any hesitation, I'll do whatever I want. So if I want this truck on the road, it goes on the road. And who says no? You? Me? No, we're still paying a salary. He's making hundreds of thousands of dollars, doesn't pay taxes on it. He lies and commits felony crimes.
What do you mean he doesn't pay taxes on it?
He didn't pay taxes on it. The government just pays him money.
You mean the FBI?
Yeah, in our trial, it came out that he got $66,000 in the year before our trial. He didn't pay taxes on that money. It's a gift. So what does he learn? He learns to do anything he wants. He goes to Pakistan, wherever he is. Who knows if he's actually there? And his son is here to stand up for him. Maybe his son takes the beating for him. I don't know.
When did he leave the U.S.?
Who knows? Who knows? He comes and goes as he pleases. Have you ever been to JFK and see the line to get in and out of JFK? Do you think he stands on that line? He doesn't. He just disappears. During our trial, he disappeared during the trial, came back. Nobody says we know where he is. The FBI agent Handler, who was on the trial, on the stand, says he goes, did you follow him in Pakistan? No. I asked him, how do you know he's not actually a terrorist? Maybe he's the actual terrorist.
Isn't there a question of he first came to the United States from Pakistan fleeing a murder charge?
So he says, right? We don't even have proof of that, but he absolutely said that he was a victim of an unlawful arrest and all these other things. We have no proof that that's true, and the FBI never offered proof that that was true. The only thing we know about the FBI is they said about the four in the trial They said in a letter, in an internal memorandum, they said, we know these guys are totally incapable of an operation without our informant.
Well, I want to go to comments that have been made, a statement that's been issued by Muslim groups in the U.S. The Muslim Solidarity Committee, Project Salam, and the Coalition for Civil Freedoms issued a statement about Hussein saying, quote, "The limousine company is the latest hit on this road of calamity. Shahid Hussein's debt to justice has not been paid. The years spent in prison and the years still to serve for the phony crimes that Hussein engineered for the FBI cannot be recovered for the men he put away. And the terrible irony of a felon convicted as part of a DMV scan who's now responsible for the faulty operation of a vehicle that killed 20 innocent people is not lost on us." So, Lyric Cabral, could you respond to that and also say what you recall from Hussein's testimony? You said that, in fact, you thought he was taking directions from the FBI.
So one of the things that has always troubled me about Hussein in response to the Project Salam statement that you just read is going back to his initial charge, which was DMV fraud. The FBI always says the FBI's argument is that it needs a criminal to catch a criminal. But going back to that actual act, which was I believe it was in the early 2000s, my question is, why did the FBI choose to hire this individual? Because that very act, for which they could have prosecuted him and put him in jail, is ultimately what killed these people. Fraud, getting vehicles, what he was convicted of, what he should have been convicted of, what the FBI knew that he was doing was helping people to receive driver's licenses illegally. And his son in this accident did not have a license to drive this vehicle. So I have not heard much scrutiny around the FBI. To date, I've not heard the Bureau make a statement about its informant, but I actually question the Bureau, really, and why they chose to employ this individual after knowing his capability around these crimes.
Lyric, you spoke to the mother of David Williams, one of the Newburgh Four. I think they're in jail, for 25 years, when she learned of this horrific car crash that involved the man who ended up getting her son in prison. What did she tell you?
Elizabeth McWilliams was just horrified. She's just wondering, like any mother would. She's still trying to get her son out of jail. She understands that despite that an injustice occurred. So I think her first response was a legal one. Going back to sort of the point that I spoke on, is there any way that the FBI can be held accountable for this man now that it's clear that the original crime when they hired him is what killed these people ultimately? So she's wondering how this current event might impact her son's charge, might impact David's freedom.
And the last 10 seconds, your response, Sam Braverman,
sure,
when you heard what happened in Schoharie.
It's more of the same for this young man. Hussein does whatever he wants to do throughout his life. And it's not just that there are sociopaths among us, because there are. It's when our government tolerates this sort of craziness, like the last story about Scott, governor in Florida. We'll just tolerate the nonsense. Let's not close our eyes and hide in the sand. If you hide in the sand about the environment, if you hide in the sand about justice, if you hide in the sand about all the issues that are important to us, why do we ever think we should be crediting you? The bottom line is they wrap their arms around a liar. And here's what reaped from what they've sowed.
And as Michael German said in the remarkable film by David Halbrunner, the HBO film, The Newburgh Sting, quoting Michael German, an FBI agent, after 9/11, after 9/11, his colleagues at the FBI were saying, the rules no longer apply. And he's walking around saying, what are you talking about? The rules no longer apply.
He says the rules, you mean the Constitution? I actually sat with Mike and I watched Lyric's film. It's a great film, and he's a good guy, too.
Sam Braverman, lawyer for one of the Newburgh Four. Lyric Cabral, co-director of the award-winning documentary Terror, which is now on Netflix. And we want to thank Khalifa, who joined us from the halfway house in Pittsburgh. We thank you so much, Khalifa Al-Akili, for enlightening us as we continue to try to find out what has taken place on the roads of upstate New York and where, at this point, Shahid Hussein is. His son is in jail. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, How Fascism Works, a new book by Yale professor Jason Stanley. Stay with us.
Portami via, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 partigiano, portami via, che mi sento di Una mattina mi sono svegliato, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Una mattina mi sono svegliato e ho trovato l'invaso. Oh partigiano, portami via, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Partigiano, portami via, che mi sento di morire. E se io muoio da partigiano, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Se io muoio da partigiano, tu mi devi seppellire. E seppellire sul montagna, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Seppellire sul montagna, sotto l'ombra di un bel
Bella Ciao, performed by Modena City Ramblers. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We end today's show with a remarkable new book titled How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them, which focuses in particular on current trends under the Trump administration, arguing that the president is not as much of an anomaly in American history as we often think. The book's author, Yale professor Jason Stanley, whose parents were both Holocaust survivors who came to the U.S. as refugees, shows instead that, quote, in its own history, the United States can find a legacy of the best of liberal democracy as well as the roots of fascist thought. Indeed, Hitler was inspired by the Confederacy and Jim Crow laws, Jason Stanley writes. He also warns of the dangers of normalizing fascist politics, saying, quote, what normalization does is transform the morally extraordinary into the ordinary. It makes us able to tolerate what was once intolerable by making it seem as if this is the way things have always been.
We're joined right now by Jason Stanley, philosophy professor at Yale University. His new book is just out. It's titled How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. His previous books, How Propaganda Works. Welcome to Democracy Now! Professor, it's great to have you with us. Why now? Why are you releasing this book, How Fascism Works Now?
Well, we have a global ultranationalist far-right movement crossing many countries, Bolsonaro in Brazil, we've just seen, and they feed off each other. So I think right now it's very important to make people aware of the features of fascism, the historical features, and to alert people to the fact that the United States has always been vulnerable to this kind of politics.
Well, explain what fascism, define what it means for you.
So fascism is an ideology based on power. Liberal democracy is based on liberty and equality. Liberty and equality require truth because you need truth to speak truth to power. And if you're lied to, you're not free. No one thinks the people of North Korea are free. They've been lied to. So if you're going to attack liberal democracy and replace it with power, you need to smash truth. So fascism is an ideology based on power and loyalty. It's based on hyper-nationalism, so one group, loyalty to one group, and one person, the leader, represents that group. It's hyper-masculine and hyper-patriarchal.
You talk about the 10 pillars of fascism. What are they?
The 10 pillars of fascism are, number one, a mythic past, a great mythic past to which the leader harkens back. Number two, propaganda. There's a certain kind of fascist propaganda where everything is inverted. The news is the fake news. Anti-corruption is corruption. So three, anti-intellectualism. As Steve Bannon said, it's Emotion, rage gets people to the polls. We got elected on lock her up and build the wall. Hitler in Mein Kampf says you want your propaganda to appeal to the least educated people. Number 4, unreality. You have to smash truth. So reason gets replaced by conspiracy theories. I first started writing, got out of my academic shell in 2011 when I wrote a piece about birtherism, because I saw conspiracy theories coming, and that's a deeply concerning sign. Unreality. So you smash truth, so all that remains is loyalty. Hierarchy. In fascist politics, the dominant group is better than everyone else. They were like the loyal, the great people in the past who deserve respect just for being them. Victimhood. In fascism, the dominant group are the greatest victims. The men are the greatest victims of encroaching feminism. Whites are the greatest victims of blacks. Germans are the greatest victims of Jews. Law and order. What are they victims of? They're victims of the outgroup, who are criminals. What kind of criminals are there? They're rapists, sexual anxiety. Pillar 9 is Sodom and Gomorrah. The real values come from the heartland. The people in the city are decadent. And Pillar 10 is Arbeit macht frei. Work shall make you free. The outgroup is lazy. They're not just criminals. They're lazy. And social Darwinism, it's all about winning. So.
Well, I want to turn to one of the features of fascism, as you identify it, this unreality. Trump was speaking earlier this year, and he took aim at the media, as indeed he has multiple times, using a phrase that prompted comparisons with George Orwell's dystopian novel, 1984.
Just remember, what you're seeing and what you're reading is not what's happening. So we have to make our country truly great again. Remember, make America great again, and then in 2.5 years, it's called Keep America Great.
So that's Trump speaking earlier this year, and just to say that George Orwell's line reads, "The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command." So can you talk about this particular feature of fascism as you see it in the U.S. under Trump?
Yeah, Trump is very clear that loyalty to him is the only guide. Reality is, of course, the greatest threat to fascism, because fascism is based on power and reality is a way of responding to power. You say it's just false. So you have to make everyone destabilized, not connected to the truth, and you have to represent yourself as reality. And you have to show that you're stronger than reality, because fascism is about machismo and power.
You are the son of Holocaust survivors. How does that weigh in to your scholarly work and what you're seeing now, and whether you believe you can talk about the United States in this way right now?
Well, I remember when I talked to my father about being the son of a Holocaust survivor, and he read me James Baldwin's 1968 piece, The Negroes are anti-Semitic because they're anti-white. And he said, and one of the lines in it, was, you think you're more connected to us because of our shared history of oppression? We're more angry at you because of our shared history of oppression, because we know you're glad not to be us. So because of my background, my mother worked in Manhattan criminal court for 33 years, I knew that the United States was replicating features of Nazi Germany and Eastern Europe with respect to its black population. So I was raised with an understanding of racialized mass incarceration. I lived through it. We're still living through it. 9% of the world's prison population is black American. So I have been continually...
9% of the
world's prison population comes from that tiny group of 38 million people. If the nation of black America... If the nation of black America was its own country, it should be the third largest nation on earth. And that's an emergency. So we came in, we've long had this fake news directed against our black population. And it's completely unsurprising that someone came and then said, hey, you're used to fake news being directed against this population. Let's just generalize it and direct it against everyone.
So what are the antecedents to Trump in America? You say there are. We have about 30 seconds.
The antecedents to Trump are well, the KKK, obviously. The 1930s, the America First movement is an antecedent to Trump. He references it. And throughout, look, Nixon is an antecedent to Trump. He ran a harsh law and order campaign in 1968. He slashed social spending to increase crime. So Nixon is a good.
We're going to continue the conversation after the broadcast, and we'll post it under web exclusives at democracynow.org. Jason Stanley, philosophy professor at Yale University. His book is How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. I'll be speaking tonight in Washington, D.C., interviewing Angela Davis at Busboys and Poets at the 450K location in Washington, D.C. That does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Carla Wills. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. Thanks for joining us.